Stephen, thank you so much for joining me today. Really excited to tell your SMU story. A big, passionate, and involved SMU alum. If you would, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thanks, Mitch. Excited to be here. So yeah, Stephen Reiff from Portland, Oregon, originally SMU class of 2010, finance undergrad and a minor in political science, and live in Dallas, Texas now with my wife, 2-year-old, and one on the way.
Amazing. Congrats. We were just laughing about how we were both the same year. We're 15 years planning. You're leading the charge, planning the reunion. It is crazy, but if you can remember, take me back to high school, Portland, Oregon. Stephen, how did you hear about SMU? How did you end up on campus? What was that kind of process like?
Yeah, I wish I had a more sophisticated criteria for you, but I loved the sunny weather in Portland. It just pours down rain and is gray. So
Right.
my criteria is like, I want to go to better weather. So I looked at a lot of schools in California, and then I looked at schools in Texas. And ironically, my dad did go to TCU. My dad's from
Okay.
Pacific Northwest as well, Spokane, Washington. Um, and so but he went to TCU, was in the marching band at TCU, and he's like, hey, there's some good schools in Texas, good business programs. And so we flew down. He was like, okay, well, we can go to TCU one day, SMU one day, and go to Baylor. And then, it was just one of those quintessential days on my SMU visit of like 75 degrees. Kids were playing frisbee out in front of Dallas Hall, one into class, and like a cute girl like showed me her books, and
Right.
and it was just like it was a phenomenal quintessential college visit. And then was thankful to get a good scholarship, and um yeah, it all came together. And I love the part too that it was 60% out of state.
Yeah.
And so even looking at, TCU or some others, like I was like, oh, I won't have any high school friends because not many kids from Oregon go. And so like knowing that there were a lot of kids from a lot of different states, and even my roommates, like ended up living with 4 guys. It was like Colorado, Florida, Arizona, California. And so I love that as well.
Yeah, that was definitely surprising to me, stepping onto campus, is how diverse the student base was from they all are in the country, right? I imagine people who think of SMU maybe outside of that world think of it as a primarily Texas-based student body, but yeah, I mean, that was one of my questions. Did you have anyone from Oregon that you knew come to SMU with you, or you were
No one, no.
the
And
first?
I went to a smaller Christian high school.
Yeah.
And then since then, people from my high school have come,
Okay.
including, Austin Prentice, who ended up becoming an
Yeah.
SMU student body president. So I'm proud that I paved the way. Another guy, Steven Nelson, played on the football team. So I
Amazing.
like to say that I
It's
helped,
a good pipeline.
pioneer.
What,
Yeah.
and I'm proud that you stuck it to your dad and went to his rival
Yeah.
in Texas.
Yeah.
So
He
that's a
was a
good
good
choice.
sport. Yeah.
Uh, and then, so what all did you know about SMU? I mean, did you know I wanted to focus on business? Kind of what was your mentality? Was it, hey, I'm going to get to campus, kind of take a little bit of everything? Or were you one of those kind of single track mind, knew you wanted to have a profession in a certain field at a young age?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I knew I wanted to do business, which is probably a common refrain, but I wanted to do it because I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I actually wanted to do management. And then my dad gave me some counsel. He's like, no one hires managers. People don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you should at least do finance, get some hard skills, and then you don't
Right.
have to do finance if you don't want to. So yeah, I knew I wanted to do business, but partly because I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Right.
And I love people and relationship building. I liked business. It started, a small business. I joke it was like a pay-per-view model at a young age where I charged my sisters to watch the Disney Channel.
That's
So
incredible.
I'd always been a little bit inclined that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd always liked politics as well. So I wanted to minor in poli-sci, but didn't know like what job I wanted. And yeah.
Do you have any memories of some of the either favorite classes you had while at SMU, or some of the ones that still impact you today as you work through a career of, consulting to business ownership? What kind of sticks with you that maybe you think back on, or even professors maybe that you still have a line to that have helped you?
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I would have taken more entrepreneurship classes, because yeah, we'll get into it, but 2 years into starting a business. But I do remember Simon Mack very well in my
Yeah.
entrepreneurship class, and like the whole like going through the process of starting a business, putting the business plan together,
Mhm.
was impactful. And actually, some of like my liberal arts classes were pretty impactful too. Like really challenged me to think differently as well. And so I think that some of those, are coming to mind. And like one of them was, I remember I took a class by Willard Spiegelman, um, and it was about poetry. And I was like, how long can a poem be? Right. And it's better than
Yeah.
like taking my English,
Right.
getting
Right.
stuck with a 500-page book. And it was like a really hard class. And he was really hard on me. Uh, and I think because I went through that, I became a really, really good writer, which is something I use every day.
I'm glad you touch on that because I think those liberal arts classes that SMU offers, I think people a lot of it think of as the Cox School and the business focus, but like you probably couldn't have even understood how much those would have impacted you in a career 15 years later where you are in communications and
Yeah,
strategy with how you are telling stories, right? Like speak to a
yeah,
little bit
had no
about
idea.
maybe to the audience that's listening that is so hardwired on business, but the importance of having some of those soft skills that you get in a poetry class or some of the other liberal arts classes that you can take while on campus.
Yeah, it's a great question. I was even thinking the other day is like what you need to do in careers, like you need to learn how to learn. And I think it like teaches you to learn how to learn. And like when you're every time you're outside your comfort zone, like you're gonna get better.
Mhm.
So I think that's part of it. And then yeah, you don't know where life takes you. Like I never in a million I joked I can't spell PR. Like I never in a million years thought I would like start a PR and
Right.
executive communication firm. And so that well-roundedness is really, really helpful. And yeah, so I think just like it really does expand your mind. Actually, like looking back on it now too, I would have thought like, should I have been like a psychology double minor? Because like I love people and like business
Right.
and like
Such
everything's
a
just
big part of
about
it.
people and like
Right.
understanding how people think and even like what books do I typically tend to read. It's a little bit behavioral economics. And so I think that would have been like an interesting track. So yeah, so I think it's like when you step outside your comfort zone and you're in that poetry class, like you're gonna be challenged and grow. And then yeah, you never know where life's gonna take you. And it's
Yeah.
the benefit where you can test and learn and uncover new passions. Like maybe you're just doing business because your dad told you to,
Right.
which wasn't the case for me. But then you take another class and you're like, oh, I really like this, and you can kind of evolve from there.
So as we move into kind of the next phase of your career,
Yeah,
pausing here, advice for those people currently at SMU's, knowing what you know now, you talked about maybe, yeah, it would have been nice to take a few more entrepreneurial classes, but you didn't know, right? But
yeah.
the importance of having a broad scope of classes that you've taken. What else would maybe you have done differently in school or encourage those who are there now to think about as they're maybe graduating or, impact the last few maybe semesters they could have on a
Hmm.
on a career?
Yeah. Um, this is a good question. I actually tell like, and I think it's changed a little bit. Like at SMU, consulting wasn't as big a thing. I think it's becoming a thing. And talking to grad school students, like can have this such a mentality of like consulting is the end all be all. If I don't get into consulting, like I'm not going to have a meaningful life. And I think that's a little bit true. And I would just encourage any like it doesn't matter if it's consulting, like if it could be something else, but like don't be worried about like if you don't get this one job that you really want, then your whole life is over. Like I wished in grad school specifically, I would have explored like a little bit more besides just like drinking the Kool-Aid on consulting. And I have no regrets, like everything's been good, but I do think like don't have to do what everyone's been doing.
Right.
And really kind of understanding like my belief is like having a great job is a function of leveraging your strengths because if you're doing what you're good at you're going to be successful and then doing it with a great community. And so if you can get a good understanding, and I believe like the career development workshop should help you take strengths finder and all the things, like
Yeah.
get a good grasp of like what are you really good at, and try to expand the aperture a little bit, of career possibilities to widen the field. Yeah,
And to your point, I mean the SMU grads now are so impressive that they're like you say, like all the big consulting firms, the investment, all that stuff's on the table for what these guys
yeah,
are doing.
yeah,
But I'm really glad you mentioned that first job, right? Like there's so much pressure and you're young, you're 22 or whatever your age is, and you think that first job means everything. You're comparing yourself against your peers. It's stressful. You think you got to make this amazing choice. Tell us about how where you were. What was your first job? How did you go about getting that job? You'd mentioned you like politics. Obviously, you like kind of like numbers and business and
Mhm.
working with people. How did the career decision go for you? And tell us where it led you right out of school.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually remember talking to the career development center quite a bit. So maybe that would be another tip of like SMU has a lot of free resources that are just like waiting for you to take advantage of them. So like
Hmm.
if you don't know what to do, go do that. And
Yeah.
one of the career counselors said you should look at leadership development programs because I'd always loved leadership. Again, I didn't know what I want to do.
Hmm.
Common theme. And they had these rotational programs where you like get to see a lot of different groups very early on. So kind of like consulting where you can go to a lot of different clients, see a lot. Um, and so that was like that's what opened my ideas was like having this conversation with the career development gal. And I did end up applying for consulting and like didn't get the internship or didn't get the job. But then yeah, Raytheon actually came to a career fair at SMU. So I like did all the things. And sometimes everyone tells you SMU, oh, it's about the network. And it's like I showed
Yeah.
up, little kid from Portland in my Nikes at the career fair. And I think by then I had a sport coat. And dropped a resume at Raytheon, and they had a finance leadership development program. So I was a finance major, so that fit. And ended up getting a job offer with them that I was really excited about. The industry was kind of secondary, but defense, touches politics, which I was interested in, but I really chose it for the leadership development program that it had.
And that had kind of a fixed ending point to it. Is that how those kind of work?
It
You
did,
knew
yeah. I
it's
mean,
going to
the
be kind
goal
of a
was
2 year.
Yeah, it was a 2-year, rotate every 6 months, and then at the end of the 2-year, hopefully you found a group that you really liked and
Yeah.
you kinda go from there. Yeah, and
And
that
that
was my story. I ended up rotating to strategy, and I was like, "Oh, I really like corporate
okay.
strategy." And thankfully the head of strategy we hit it off, and he liked me, so
Yeah.
he let me stay.
No, that seems like a ideal situation for a graduate who knows they want, something that's challenging, but not quite sure what they want to see. So to be able to go to a big corporation and kind of see it from a few different lenses is seems to be a nice fit. Did you know after 2 years it was grad school was always a goal for you? Or was it, hey, I found strategy. It sounds like you like strategy. What stopped you from just staying there and kind of building a career there versus, okay, I want to go apply to some grad schools and maybe do something different?
Yeah. A few things. One, the rotation took me to DC. So Raytheon moved me to DC where their strategy office was based. So I talked about my interest in politics.
Hmm.
And so the political itch was being scratched a little bit.
Cool.
And it coincided with the 2012 presidential campaign. So I actually reached out to a friend from SMU who I was like, I want, who was more connected. I was like, I think she might know somebody. And so I'm like, do you know anybody on the Romney campaign? So she helped get me connected to the Romney campaign. And
Cool.
I just thought that this would be like a unique opportunity. It would have been like a dream to work in politics someday. I didn't know who, what, when, where, why, and how. And
Hmm.
I was like, well, I'll plant some seeds and I'll pray. And if the door's open, I'll go through it. If not, I'm happy to stay. And the doors ended up opening to accept a position to work on Mitt Romney's presidential campaign. So
So,
I went
so
to it.
what's that like? I mean, I think we'll very fewly have enough people in my world where I can understand what it's like to work on a presidential campaign. What skills do you need? What all transpired? What is your day to day? And then, thinking of those listening who do, like you, want to get into politics one day, um, who are in their junior, senior year, or even out of school. What does
Yeah.
that life look like? Kind of what are some of the things they should think about to prepare themselves to be successful in that role?
Yeah, it was a blast. And I have to caveat politics has changed so much. And so my experience, even though, how many years, 12 years out now, could be completely different
Uh-huh.
because
Yeah.
it's a whole new game. But it was a phenomenal experience. I actually think I've struggled a little bit because it almost feels like career peaked a little bit as like a
Yeah.
24-year-old staffer when you're like
Right.
next to the presidential candidate and like talking to
Wow.
Secret Service agents and like on the campaign bus. And like, I feel
That's
like I've been wanting that experience ever since.
Right.
And
Right.
so I don't know, I can't compare myself to a professional athlete, but I almost wonder it's like you like become a professional athlete and retire by 30 and then it's like then
Right.
what do you do? And so I've
Right.
actually feel like I've struggled a little bit to like capture
That
that.
juice again. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was a blast. And I think it was very entrepreneurial. I joked if I was Raytheon's best employee ever, I would have been on like a slow, steady ascent and maybe managed a team in 5 years. And then they're like, Steven, no one's leading this team. You seem to be like decent, like go manage this team. So within
Yeah.
like, a month, I was like managing a team of 5 people and like
Wow.
figuring out how to lead. Um, and so I think like it gave me a lot of good leadership and like management
Yeah.
experience right off the
Yeah.
bat. And it was, yeah, it was fun. A lot of those pinch me moments. It was like the West Wing TV show.
Wow.
It kind of, it felt like that. And I compare it to like camp almost because it's a lot of people similar age stage. You're
Right.
like, very mission driven and you
Yeah.
put your heart and soul, you're sleeping on the air mattresses, and then
Wow.
all of a sudden it's over and like everyone goes home.
Right. Right.
So that was kind of another analogy I would use to describe a
And so
campaign
people who maybe
experience.
are interested in that, is it go find a local representative that you align with and kind of start to volunteer and get involved? It seems like there's no shortage of good people they need to help on their campaigns or whatnot, or is it kind of you also
Yeah,
had a perfect storm of from timing, right? That you
right.
graduated, were wrapping up NDC, that kind of helped you catapult into it too. How should someone think about getting into, whether it's themselves or supporting a political campaign?
Yeah, I think this is where I'd say it is a little bit about relationships.
Yeah.
It can always be helpful to start local. I think SMU is actually very uniquely well positioned for students who want to go into politics. We have a
Mm,
great kind of SMU and DC program. There's a lot of students who've kind of gone to DC. And so I would, local's a great route to start, especially like everyone needs internships. And so like getting your feet wet in the internships and back to my experience of like, they'll give you a lot of responsibility early on.
yeah.
Like if you're struggling to get internships, getting into politics at the local level can be helpful. But I would look at, trying to get to DC post graduation because then you're going
Okay.
to build
Network
a lot
there.
of those relationships.
So you go Raytheon, find strategy as a good fit,
Yeah.
ultimately leads to something you always had aspirations for, working on a presidential political campaign, which I imagine strategy is very much involved with that day to day, and you guys are moving at 100 miles a minute from there. But like
Mhm.
you said, camp's over, time to pick up the pieces. Where do you go next? You're
Yeah.
right there in DC. Is that kind of where UVA and Darden School made sense to go get your MBA as you kind of let the dust settle and see where the next phase would take you?
Yeah, exactly. I'd actually moved to Boston at the time where the campaign was headquartered. But I did want to keep up. So I didn't want to go back into politics, but I did want to keep up some of those relationships. And then I had a friend at UVA. But even taking a step back, I was doing a lot of soul searching. What do I
Hmm.
do? What
Hmm.
should I do? I talked about I'd been interested in MBA, but I didn't know kind of if I wanted to, but I
Right.
realized like, okay, 3 strong years of work experience, have compelling stories coming off the campaign. And so I'm going to give a shot and apply and see if I can get in. And then, yeah, UVA was a great fit, very similar to SMU, even like architecturally.
Yeah.
And then as I said, yeah, still on the East Coast and they let me in too, which is always a
Always
bonus.
always helpful.
Yeah, and then they taught via the case study method, which I loved
Yeah.
too. It's like
Okay.
I think in some undergrad classes you get a little PowerPoint presentation. I remember going there and just sitting in on a class, and it was like an accounting class, which I would find boring, but it was actually like I was shocked it class was over in an hour. It was really interesting.
That's
So,
cool.
so I decided to do an MBA as a way to pivot kind of back into the business world
Right.
post campaign.
And was it heavy strategy focused? I know, we'll kind of speed a little bit here, but
Yeah.
Deloitte was the next piece. And you mentioned, you kind of maybe had a thought of consulting the second you were in grad school. Is that the case? Or were you open to kind of seeing what opportunities came from that UVA network and kind of being in that part of the country?
Yeah, I kind of drank the Kool-Aid. I think even in my admissions application I wrote, I
Yeah.
wanted to go into management consulting. And so, yeah, and then once you get there, if you want that track, you kind of jump in
Okay.
head first.
So
Yep.
what in your 3 years leading up to grad school, working and kind of into those early stages allowed you to kind of think management consulting is the right fit for me? Did you have friends on the campaign, or did you start to meet a lot of people who had careers in that you're like, I want to do what they're doing? Or how did that click to know this is what
Mm.
Stephen should be doing going forward?
Yeah, I think peers, and maybe now that I'm talking to you, there's a little bit of the narrative of like I don't know what I want to do, and so
Yeah,
it pushes that decision off because it's like another
yeah,
really good training ground. I think kind of wrongly showed to you, I'm like, oh, if I get, a consulting firm on my resume, then I'm set for life, which was like
right.
wrong. And I ended up like, getting rejected by a lot of firms. And that was a big
Okay.
part of kind of Stephen was humbled in a good way,
Yeah,
a
yeah,
little bit. And so yeah, I think, but it was just talking with people, and then you hear like when you get to school, you like hear consultants talk about the job, and like, oh, I consulted for a cruise company, and we spent 3 weeks on a cruise as we figured out the strategy. I was like, I want to
yeah,
do that, and then you get
yeah,
into the consulting, and you're like, where's the cruise project? And you're like stuck in the bottom basement.
yeah. In South Dakota, working on a
Yeah.
mining company.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's kind of how I drank the Kool-Aid. And it is phenomenal training ground. And I think like, you get more exposure to figure out again what you want to do a little bit more.
So again, tying it back to maybe to the advice of for those who haven't walked in your shoes yet,
Yeah,
advice for either undergrads who are looking at consulting at some of the
yeah,
bigger firms versus graduates, kind of how should they think about what a career is like in that kind of skills they should think about, and then just also, to your point, the transparency of what the job really entails, the good, the
yeah.
bad, the ugly.
Yeah, I do think it is phenomenal training. I would recommend it. Like the advice, I actually spoke at SMU class the other day. Like, if you can go big and start small, like it's easier to go big and then go smaller. But if you start
Hmm.
small, it's harder. So that badging is helpful for
Yeah.
credibility, and the consulting firms do kind of teach you how to learn because you're, get
Yeah.
placed on a project and you have to get up to speed very quickly. So I didn't mean to mean it overly negative because it is phenomenal
No,
training
for
ground.
sure.
So I do I do recommend it. It's just not the end all be all. And so yeah, getting in it, case studies like at SMU, I didn't study that hard for the case study, and like I realized in grad school, like they don't really care about your resume. They don't even care about your GPA. Like if you don't do well in the case study, you're not getting. So I thought I could kind of ride the wave of like people
Okay.
skills and
Good
like
credentials, yeah.
GPA, credentials. But it's like, no, if you don't show up to game day, like
Mm,
doing well in the case, you're not going to make it around. And so I learned the
interesting.
hard way on that one. Yeah.
Okay. So we select Deloitte. It's 2 years there, and then you mentioned, like you say, big to small. Maybe you'd mentioned the grind of traveling every week was tough, but 3 years, what? No, 4 years of consulting. When did you decide it was time to go from that lifestyle, that career to an in-house position with yeah, I don't know if MoneyGram was a client at the time, or kind of
Yeah.
walk us through the life cycle from consulting into more traditional corporate role.
Yeah. Yeah. So I ended up leaving Deloitte. As you said, I turned 30, like not married, like it's hard to be on the road, and actually found a firm called Slalom, which has provided some of the basis for my firm in that they hired burnt out consultants and gave them local work and better work life
Nice.
balance.
It's a good
So that
model.
was, yeah, so that was very refreshing. So I could still do the interesting work, but kind of get my life back
Yeah.
a little bit. And then, yeah, I was consulting for a client called MoneyGram at the time. They were almost bought out, and I was working with their leadership team on how, now that they weren't being bought out, how do they develop their own strategy? And they didn't have anybody leading corporate strategy. And so I was
Mm,
able to come in. And the first title there was head of corporate strategy. And I really worked to like establish strategy as a function, much like accounting or marketing. It wasn't just like a smart person in a room tinkering on like
yeah.
ideas. It was like, oh, here's our annual strategic planning process. Like we're
Yeah.
going to do this every year at these certain times. So,
So I want to
um,
pause you there because I do
yeah,
think strategy is a broad term in
yeah,
business. And it's like, I do strategy. And they're like, oh, it sounds awesome. Like you
yeah.
just like sit in a room and throw awesome ideas on a whiteboard. How do you formalize strategy? Like you said, to a company that's large that obviously has strategic vision and places they want to go, to where you say, okay, we have a true, like you said, core strategy that's year over year that we're looking to build upon, that has metrics. Like, how do you build that? How do us who don't live in the world of strategy
Yeah.
understand what it is you guys are
I'm
doing and
so
the
glad you
value you're
stopped me.
driving?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so hard. I think strategy or even consulting is two things. One, it's like helping companies or functions align on priorities. It's like, what are your top four priorities? Or it's helping them make a specific decision about something.
Okay.
Um, and that's how I structured the corporate strategy group at MoneyGram is what are our four prior like where are we going as a we're kind of what's our journey, how do we define the journey, which is kind of
Mhm.
some storytelling, and then what are our four priorities to get there, and then how do we align employees, the board, Wall Street, and everybody behind that, while also then doing internal consulting projects where you're answering more specific questions. And I think analogies are the key to communication. It's not a perfect analogy, but it provides a little bit of intro to my firm. I
Mhm.
give it analogy like a doctor. So you go in, and a doctor can have like the best strategy in the world. He can have the best treatment plan. He knows how to do the best procedure. But if he has a horrible bedside manner, you may not trust him, or may not
Right.
follow him. And at the same time, you can have a bad strategy, bad treatment plan. But if you communicate it really well, you're still going to have bad outcomes. So that's
Right.
why you
You're
need
getting your
both.
arm
Like,
cut off, but it sounded
yeah,
good.
yeah, exactly. But I feel good about it. Like he's going to
Yeah.
do a good job cutting it
Yeah.
off, even though and so you really need you need the right strategy, treatment plan, and the right story. And then that's going to lead to positive outcomes for patients and companies, is my thesis.
And so do C-suites and leaders see the value in, like, okay, you got to create that foundation and then build off of it? Or is it, that's, I'm probably jumping ahead here into
Yeah.
what you
Yeah.
created, and maybe we'll stop there. So you do this for MoneyGram, which led to then tell the story of kind of where the
Yeah.
communications and PR piece kind of evolved to, you know, the meat of our conversation here now.
Yeah. So I was leading corporate strategy. Things were going well. We were a publicly traded company. And so the CEO sent me the earnings call transcript. And Stephen, can you help kind of let me know your thoughts on it? It was a beautiful piece of writing, but it was kind of tone deaf to here's our strategy, here's the results that it drove.
Mm.
And it was kind of tone deaf to the industry and stuff too. So I rewrote the earnings call transcript, and he's like, okay, now you have investor relations responsibilities to help tell our story and
Yeah.
the results our strategy is driving to Wall Street. And then there was another day that went by, and he's like, we haven't had a press release in 3 months. I was like, I know, we just signed a partnership. So I went to go talk to a coworker named Matt, and then I Googled how to write a press release, and I showed it to the CEO. And he's like, this is good. You can get it out. And I was like, you don't have any edits? And he's like, no,
Yeah.
it's really good. And then it went out, stock popped a little bit. And one thing led to another. They gave me all of corporate communications. And so I was leading that team. One of my mentors actually from UVA, or I read an article about a guy who led exec comms at Coca-Cola, who is now
Uh-huh.
teaching at UVA. So I asked him to mentor me, and he's now a co-founder of the firm.
Mhm.
And so I was leading strategy and communications, which was interesting. And then the MoneyGram story was our stock price was at $2, and then it went to $11 when it was eventually bought out by private equity. But revenue and EBITDA were flat during
Mhm.
that time,
Yeah.
and then that's when I took a step back of oh wow, there's some magic that can happen. When you change your strategy and then you change the perception through storytelling, but you back to my doctor example, you really need both. And I founded my firm with the name Arvo, which means valuation, because I was like, what does a startup CEO cared about? Was a Fortune 500. Everyone cares about their valuation.
Right.
And there's different studies that show that 25% of a company's valuation is dependent on its reputation. So
Wow.
that's where I want to play, is helping boost that 25% for companies. So that's kind of where. And then when the private equity deal happened, I'd always wanted to start my own business.
Yeah.
The co-founder who was doing his own consulting is like, McDonald's just put an MBA over their exec comms. I'm seeing this need to kind of combine poets and quants.
Yeah.
And I had hired the firms at that point. I'd
Yeah.
hired the PR firms, and
Yeah.
I had to edit all their work. And I was like, I want to create the firm that I wished had existed
Yeah. Yeah.
to combine the management consulting rigor with the PR firms, because you need both, right? Which is what we talked about. You need the poets and you need the quants, and so many strategists like, here's your deck, here's your strategy, see you later.
Right.
But like, you can be the world's best strategist, but it's just going to collect dust on the shelf if people don't get excited about it. And that's where I found was like really lacking. So my vision is to create this like new category of consulting. It's like half
Okay.
Deloitte, half Edelman, which is like a big PR firm. And so that's a little bit of my vision.
I love that. And so, one question I ask is kind of, when did you know you were kind of good at what you're doing, or that this might work, right? And you kind of learned that at MoneyGram, right? Is that, like you said,
Yeah.
there is a secret sauce here in the storytelling, and you then, a common theme you hear is these people who start companies, they build out of need for what they wanted in a previous role, right? So you did that as well. Did you always think maybe you might own your own consulting firm or kind of your own company one day? Or was this just kind of like everything lined up to where there was an exit with your other company and the timing to leave was okay? Or was it just, you just kind of had to rip the Band-Aid off, and if you were going to do it, it's do it now?
All the above. I had kind of thought about entrepreneurship, and I just didn't know like what it was. And I thought it would be more of like a product.
Yeah.
But not, yeah. And then I had wanted to be CEO. I was like, well, another way to be CEO is just to like
Create
start
it.
your own. Yeah. And then it was the timing of the buyout. It was interesting that week too, of like, I decided I was going to leave, and we found out we were pregnant that week with our
Yeah,
first kid.
of course.
And so it's kind of interesting. Maybe God's on the move here a little bit. And then I felt like I had this idea, and then a little bit of like, there's actually different studies that show entrepreneurs aren't that big of risk takers. Like
Yeah.
Steve, my business partner, ended up having his book. He's like, no, you can do it. Like, we've got clients. And so it was kind of like all the things. But I have realized like it's a lot harder than I thought. Like, I had never struggled with anxiety before, and like all last year I've struggled with anxiety. And it is, you see all these overnight successes, especially at SMU. You're just like, it's just like all these seemingly overnight successes, and it's like, it's most definitely more like patience and perseverance, like steady Eddie,
for sure,
than I was expecting.
So what had to happen for Arvo to start? What was kind of the choice one? Was it having a business partner and kind of someone who's experienced that you could commit to, that said he was going to kind of do this with you? Was it, do I need to lock up a couple clients first? Like, how did you think about starting this business to where you could be, 2.5 years later, kind of continuing to grow and see light at the end here?
Yeah, I guess it started kind of with just the idea behind the firm and creating the firm that I wished had existed. So I think it started there. And then with the supportive wife encouraging me that we should do it. But yeah, I think it's better to start out with like a existing client. I didn't. But I do think like Steve kind of reduced the risk and was like part of the prompting.
Because you went into this as almost, you're obviously not an outsider, right? You did this, but it wasn't like you left some other firm who's taking your other clients to do the same thing. You're really pitching yourself as, hey, I'm creating this concept as I was a buyer once. I know what can be done. But you're essentially, is that cold calling firms? Like, so walk us through where Arvo is today, who clients are, as we can think about who you need to talk to, who's the ideal client, and kind of, if you had that 15 seconds with the decision maker, what do they need to hear?
Yeah. Yeah, we're working with two different, I'll start with the ideal types of clients. The ideal, there's two. One is like the mid-sized companies in Dallas that have reached a size and scale that they need to start telling their story a little bit more. One specifically had kind of quietly grown, and then they're like, hey, our competitors are better known, but they have a lot worse product. And that's like, ding, ding, ding. That's where I can help correct this market misperception. So it's more than mid-sized companies, and that's what a little bit more of like the core PR, which I can unpack too. And then we've actually worked with Fortune 500 companies. That's a little bit more similar to the MoneyGram story of, we feel like we're undervalued. Other companies are getting more credit, but our performance is actually better. Can you help us on our growth narrative? Like, how do we tell our story? Some of it is nuts and bolts like executive communication, CEOs speaking at X, Y, and Z. We need talking points that explain our strategy, or we need to roll out a new strategy to a company. How can we get employees excited around it? And then we're starting to work a little bit more on like helping communication functions do strategic planning. Some of like the, I don't know, knock on communicators is that they're executors.
Right.
And so it's like, how can we help them run their strategic planning process for the function so that they're being viewed more strategic and getting in front of the curve? And so back to your question, what is strategy? And a lot of what we hear is like, what does it mean to be a strategic leader? It means being able to show your priorities and then show how you're executing them. And it means you need to see where the puck's moving and like where the trends are going and
Okay.
how your plan is in response to that. So that's a little bit, not the elevator pitch, but a little bit
Yeah.
unpacking of the types of projects that we're doing.
And how deep do you need to go with a client? Is it you need to kind of have a full week, like just like your consulting days, get on site, kind of go through everything, interview people, and kind of get a real feel for the company, or is it
Yeah.
just a mixed bag depending on what they need and what they are? You got to be pretty nimble.
Yeah. For the larger companies, yeah, we are working on like sprints, like a 4 to 6 week sprint where we can help them, and that's what we're seeing. A lot of people, they're not wanting to spend, multiple months on
Hmm.
these projects. Like they're
Hmm.
buying much more in like sprints. And so, yeah, we can go and like do the interview days and like, in the background, do competitive analysis and like try to align stakeholders within 4 to 6 week sprints. And then on the PR side, we actually have longer term relationships with clients, kind of
Okay.
to get their word out and their voice
Yeah.
out, kind of in year long agreements.
And are you industry agnostic? Is it mostly XYZ, firms or industries, or is it kind of you have clients that run the full gamut of what they do?
Full gamut. Travel and hospitality has become a little bit of a niche. We're working some with a venture capital firm and their portfolio companies. Like we're finding a little bit of a niche within startups as they need to announce Series A fundraising. It's like a way that they can announce
Yeah,
themselves to the world and then kind of build momentum
amazing.
behind their strategy. So those are some niches. Yeah.
Well, there should be no shortage of SMU alumni who have companies, whether they own or have started or, are in decision making roles that I think need to have a conversation with you. Before I let you go, though, we need to wrap and talk kind of where you went a little viral with your ESPN and Mavs PR, right? We all know, if you're not a sports fan, you can turn it off at this point. But for me, I got to kind of see where this came from. We all know the Mavs, obviously, Mark Cuban sells the company. A year later, the ownership in charge somehow makes the most bonehead trade of all time. Um, where did you get pulled into this to add your insight and kind of, a fun story of how you came in as a thought leader of how this kind of really blew up in the Mavs face, right? I mean, totally
Um,
pushed a fan base and a community against a local team that should never be the case, right?
yeah. Yeah, thanks. It was fun. It was actually an SMU friend who referred me to the ESPN reporter, who was looking to cover the story of like what just happened in Dallas, and speaking to someone in PR and crisis communication, and it's really right down the middle of the fairway. There's a great quote of like your strategy is only as good as your ability to communicate it, and I talked about like Mavs fan wanted to believe in like if you're making a bold seemingly crazy decision, at least like explain why. Like we want
Mhm.
to believe in you, like we want to understand your vision. And there was just none of the explanation. So I had the opportunity to talk with the reporter and kind of unpack of that. And then, Mark Cuban came out a couple days later and said it's not necessarily what you do, it's how you explain like why you did it, which is exactly speaks to like what I'm most passionate about and thesis behind the firm, as well. And so not even questioning the strategy, but just you have to be able to
Reason.
explain,
Yeah.
and that's what I had the opportunity to talk to ESPN about.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to have you back on here, whether it's this year or next, and kind of see where you've taken this firm and the stories you've told. It's been fun to hear how your career has progressed, and you've allowed it to kind of take you in new areas. And seems like you're really happy with where life is taking you now, and the ownership in your firm. And like you say, there's there's still plenty of hills to climb, but they're your hills, so that's awesome. Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time out today. We'll be sure to share your story with all those SMU alums and those needing any of Stephen's support. Be sure to reach out to him, and we'll share his contact information. So thanks again, Stephen.
Great. Thanks, Mitch. It's an honor to be here. Pony up.
Pony up. Thank you to our incredible sponsors, Security National Bank, Hilltop Property Tax, Mignon Steakhouse, Sound of a Rose podcast, and the SMU's Cox School of Business for making this all possible.